Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Bourgeois, and I work for the Graduate Programs Office, Faculty of Law, McGill University. In an ongoing series of webcasts, we'll be introducing you to professors in our faculty and exploring our Doctor of Civil Law, Master of Laws, and Graduate Certificate programs. Today, I'd like to welcome Professor Ignacio Cofone, who will offer a brief presentation about his research and discuss what his current graduate students are working on in the faculty. Professor Caffone is an assistant professor at McGill Law and teaches courses related to privacy law, advanced obligations, and artificial intelligence law. His research explores how the law should adapt to technological and social change. Professor Caffone, it's a pleasure to welcome you today. And to start, can you tell us a little bit about your research and teaching interests at the faculty?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is a great idea that you're doing this. What I work on is privacy law as it relates to this thing that we call algorithms. Sometimes we call it AI. So my interest here comes from a broader interest on how technological change produces social change and how the law should account for that social change. So there's an old phrase that says that the future's already here, is just unevenly distributed. And questions of privacy or technology or AI are mainly questions about how the new technological developments that we have can affect people and can affect them unequally, and whether it changes some assumptions that the law has and how we should address those assumptions and how we should tackle the new problems that or the new situations that these social changes bring. So working on privacy is more than how annoyed I may be when a company reads my emails, or how bothered you are when you see a particular targeted ad for something that you like or that you don't like. It's about how our personal information shapes artificial intelligence in a way that governs us. It determines our credit scores, it determines our employment prospects, it determines if we are in a criminal process, hopefully none of us anytime soon. It determines what our chance of getting bail or getting parole. And privacy is also about a number of harms that people may suffer. So the way that corporations handle their personal information can lead to reputational harms, financial harms, physical harms, all sorts of things, autonomy harms, things that we not necessarily intuitively relate to our privacy, but it's directly determined by it. So because of that, privacy touches on many of what we call the fundamental fields of law. So contract law, tort law, constitutional law, property law, criminal law, and that's particularly the case when you work on artificial intelligence, because it's artificial intelligence is something that sometimes brings new questions for the law, but also sometimes brings back old questions in a way that forces us to rethink the answers that the law has always been giving them. So, for example, when you think about algorithmic discrimination to some extent is something new, is something that we haven't seen before, but to some extent it pushes our intuitions about discrimination and makes us rethink some of the assumptions that we always had about how discrimination works and how we should tackle it. So some projects that I did recently within this umbrella of interest is the last paper I wrote was about immunity passports and how immunity passports can if poorly designed, can bring a set of problems for privacy, but also for inequality, depending on how their design can produce unintended, undesirable consequences for in terms of discrimination and inequality. I'm now working on a paper on data ownership. Data ownership is this idea that has become increasingly popular, that we would solve many privacy problems if we let people own their own data, which is false, as I try to show in the paper. It has lots of reasons why it cannot achieve its own aims, and it also wouldn't increase people's privacy protection, which has consequences for things like blockchain, data trusts, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. One project that I've been working on for a while is algorithmic discrimination, and showing how the unintended or intended, but more often than not unintended discriminatory effects of AI algorithms when they're used for decision making can operate differently than human beings directly making discriminatory choices. And that means that our current anti-discrimination law is not as effective as we would like it to be at addressing those harms and thinking how we can how we can engage in law reform to, first of all, preempt the discriminatory decision. So how we can regulate AI in a way that it becomes less discriminatory, which relates to a computer science conversation about algorithmic fairness. And after the fact, so after discrimination takes place, how we could and should change anti-discrimination law for it to have the scope to remedy these harms. And this is an example of what I was saying, that privacy has sometimes an unexpected reach into other areas of the law, to the extent that technology creeps into other areas of the law, because algorithmic discrimination is a lot about privacy, because algorithms are trained with our personal information. So the extent to which we give them personal information, or what kind of information we give them, directly impacts the kind of output that they have and whether that output is discriminatory or not. So privacy has lots of potential to address algorithmic discrimination together with anti-discrimination law.
Great. Well, that's all very thought-provoking, and I'm sure that prospective applicants who are listening really appreciate learning more about your research interest. Can you let us know a little bit more about what some of your current graduate students in the faculty are working on?
Yeah, certainly. So I have one doctoral student now and one incoming next year, both of whom, well, one of them is working on and the other one will be working on algorithmic discrimination. So how law reform can reduce discrimination in a way that accounts for how it's different from the type of discrimination that the law is used to dealing with, and how we can address it. So one of them is focusing on international instruments and how they have dealt with the issue and how they can deal with the issue better. And another one will be working starting next year on national law and how Canadian anti-discrimination law can be changed. Then I'm now working with one master's student with thesis who's working on developing regulatory mechanisms to address online misinformation based on a Facebook case study. So, for example, when you have social networks that help disseminate information that is not truthful about vaccines, for example, what do you do? Are they liable? Are they not liable? Should they be liable? Should they not be liable? Obviously, the answer is not a yes or no, but it depends, and much more complicated than that. And then, not exactly a student, but adjacent. Starting next year, I'll be working with a postdoctoral fellow who will be working on liability mechanisms for AI in how they interact with the insurance law. So oftentimes the law sets liability to set incentives to take care. But when we set those things ignoring insurance law, then insurance law changes that, because oftentimes depending on how the insurance is structured, you don't necessarily have the same incentives to take care if you don't have to pay for it yourself, but instead you have to pay an insurance premium. So she will work on how to shape the liability and insurance law interaction so that companies that develop AI for decision-making have adequate incentives to take care.
Okay, wow. So your students are working on some really interesting projects. That's great to know.
I think so. They're great.
And in September 2021, we'll start accepting applications for fall 2022 entry. When we send you a file to review for supervision, can you let us know what you look for when you accept to supervise an LLM or DCL candidate? So what would make an applicant stand out to you?
Yeah, so I look for students with the interest and the capacity to work on ideas. So I look at research proposals very closely, but not because I hold them to the comma to that research proposal, but rather because first of all, it gives me a good idea of their area of interest and whether it's a good fit with the projects that I work on. And second, it tells me how they argue their own ideas, what kind of ideas they're interested in, and whether they're likely to pursue a similar one. So as you noticed when I was telling you what I work on, I don't work so much on doctrinal issues, which is whether a certain law applies to a certain situation, but I'm mainly interested in law reform and how the law should be. And so I work best with students that are also interested in how the law should be as it relates to privacy and AI. So what I don't need or what I don't look for is someone who's an expert on privacy law or an expert on privacy regulation, because they can learn that here, but rather someone who who is interested in not only describing the law but potentially changing it. And usually, as I do, also every time I start a new project, people come with a big idea. Then they realize that someone else stole it in 1995. Then they narrow it down, and then they found that someone else said that already, and then they narrow it down further, and then after some process, they come up with their own idea that is their contribution to the conversation about the direction that the law should go for. And I think it's great to help them in that process.
Oh, well, great. And lastly, I'm wondering if you could say a few words on why someone should apply to pursue graduate studies in law. What do you think that our faculty can offer them?
Well, I can tell you what I came to McGill. I came to McGill because it's one of the faculties that is the most interdisciplinary, and I think that's great. People here are really interested in students and in faculty, bringing all sorts of different perspectives to the law, economics, sociology, philosophy, and science, and so on and so forth. And exploring how insights from other disciplines can help improve the law. People here, faculty members here, are some of the most comparative faculty that I've ever seen at any law school. And I think that's fantastic. If you're trying to solve a social problem through law, a very important way of doing that is seeing how other legal systems address that problem and seeing whether there are any insights that you can borrow from those legal systems. So I think that's good if you're interested in law reform. And McGill has also experts in all sorts of areas. So I was mentioning that if you work on AI, you have to work a bit on contract law, a bit on tort law, a bit on property law. So it's fantastic to be here and then be able to knock on a colleague's door and ask them about consent in contract law, what constitutes meaningful consent, or how does property law in civil law interact with property law in common law and interacts with property law in indigenous law, as to how should I think about this property law problem, for example, in data ownership. And that's much, and I think that's much more important than almost anything else when I'm doing my research and when graduate students also are doing their research here. So I think that's a very good reason to come to McGill.
Well, Professor Caffone, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this webcast with us. And to everybody watching, if you have any questions about our Master of Laws, Doctor of Civil Law, or graduate certificate programs, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can consult our website at mcgill.ca/law. Just click on graduate programs at the top. You can also send us an email at grad.law@mcgill.ca. Thank you again for watching today.
Thank you for having me here.